Rain was coming down in silver sheets when I first noticed the hiss. It was faint at first, like a snake in the grass, but the second I stepped off my porch, the hiss turned into a spray. My once perfect green hose lay there in two jagged halves, water gushing out like a wounded artery. And there she was, Karen, standing across the cul-de-sac with a smug, self-satisfied smile, holding pruning shears like she'd just completed some noble act of community service. I froze, jaw tight, rain hitting my face. The woman actually waved at me. "It's a safety violation," she shouted over the storm. "You can't have it stretched across the sidewalk like that." She was wearing one of those rain ponchos that looked like it came free with a car wash. Neon yellow, hood up, hair plastered to her forehead, eyes gleaming with authority she'd invented for herself. For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. My hose was rolled neatly along my driveway every night. But logic never stood a chance against Karen, the self-appointed guardian of the homeowners association. She'd already fined me once for unauthorized lawn edging, and left 3 notes about my mailbox being too modern. Now, apparently, my garden hose was an act of rebellion. I didn't yell. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I turned off the water and calmly examined the damage. Clean-cut, brand-new blade. My weekend plans had included repainting the deck, not dealing with vandalism, but I kept my voice even when I said, "You know that's destruction of property, right?" She lifted her chin. "You should be thanking me. Someone could have tripped." The HOA takes safety very seriously. That was Karen's favorite sentence. The HOA takes this very seriously. She'd said it about my lawn, my paint color, even the solar lights I put near my walkway. The irony was that Karen wasn't even on the HOA board anymore. She'd been removed last year after too many complaints, but she never quite accepted her dethroning. That night, as thunder rolled across the neighborhood, I sat at my kitchen window watching rainwater cascade from the gutters. And that's when the idea struck. Not the kind of impulsive revenge that comes from anger, but a cold, slow-burn kind of justice that makes you smile weeks later. I spent the next morning testing the damage to the hose, cutting off the jagged end, and slipping on a new brass connector. I ran it just long enough to make sure the water pressure was still solid. It worked beautifully. Then I looked across the street at Karen's house, the one with the brand-new aluminum gutters she bragged about at every HOA meeting, and I started to plan. Over the next few days, I made casual conversation whenever she was outside, pretending to let it go. I even complimented her hydrangeas, though they looked half dead from overwatering. "Well," she said proudly, "some of us actually care about curb appeal." I smiled and nodded, already picturing what curb appeal would look like when her gutters exploded like geysers. The forecast called for heavy rain that Friday. Perfect. On Thursday evening, after dark, I pulled on gloves and quietly walked across the street with my repaired hose coiled neatly. Karen had gone out, her SUV was gone, and the only light came from the dim glow of her porch lamp. Her gutters, freshly installed, had one long downspout that curved toward the side of the house. I gently wedged the end of my hose into it and secured it with zip ties I'd painted to match the aluminum. Then I ran the other end back across the street, tucked under leaves and behind the low fence, straight to my outdoor faucet. It wasn't sabotage. It was poetic redirection. The storm began around midnight, steady at first, then growing into a full-on deluge. I waited until I saw the lightning flicker through the blinds before turning the tap halfway open. Water surged through the hose and into her gutters, doubling the load. 5 minutes later, I cracked it open a little more. By the time the thunder hit again, I heard it, the metallic groan of gutters under pressure. A minute later, the sound changed. A deep gurgle, then a crash. I opened the window just enough to hear it clearly. Splintering wood, rushing water, and a distant shriek. By morning, the damage was spectacular. Half her gutters were torn loose, the siding was streaked with muddy runoff, and the mulch in her flower bed had washed halfway down the street. She was outside in a bathrobe, hair a disaster, yelling into her phone about defective installation. The gutter company truck showed up before noon. I stood in my driveway, coffee in hand, offering a look of sympathetic concern. "Rough night, huh?" "They sold me cheap materials," she snapped. "Look at this mess." I nodded solemnly. "Yeah, that's the problem with poor drainage. It just builds and builds until something gives." For the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Karen demanded the HOA investigate the contractor. She called a meeting, insisting everyone check their drainage systems to avoid similar catastrophes. I attended, of course, quietly sipping my water while she lectured about personal responsibility and negligence. But Karen's vengeance radar is sharp. The following week, she noticed the faint scuff marks near her downspout. I saw her kneel down, squint, and touch the dried mud. She didn't say anything to me that day, but the way she looked across the street afterward told me she was starting to wonder. Her first move was predictable. She installed a motion-activated security camera above her porch. The second was less predictable. She started walking her dog past my house at odd hours, pretending to check her mail. I decided to let her simmer. The longer she obsessed, the less she could prove. Meanwhile, her yard turned into a swamp. The stormwater had shifted the slope, and now every rainfall pooled near her foundation. The contractor told her it'd cost several thousand to fix. She blamed the HOA for ignoring drainage regulations. They ignored her back. Still, I didn't push my luck. I disconnected the hose and stored it away. For a while, life returned to normal. Or as normal as it gets when you live across from a woman who files noise complaints because someone's wind chimes are too reflective. 2 weeks later, I caught her snooping near my property line again. She was pretending to measure something with a tape, muttering about encroachments. I walked out casually and said, "Looking for something?" She froze. "Just verifying property boundaries. It's HOA policy." "Funny," I said. "I read the policy last night. Didn't see your name on the board." Her face tightened. "You're a troublemaker. Always have been." I smiled. "And yet, somehow, my gutters still work." She stormed off, her little dog yipping behind her. That night, she posted a rant on the HOA's community board accusing certain residents of malicious behavior. It backfired. One of the other neighbors, a retired lawyer, asked for evidence. When she couldn't provide any, her post was deleted. But Karen doesn't quit. She started a new campaign. Noise complaints, parking notes, even claiming my porch light was too bright. Each time, I responded politely, documenting everything. I had a feeling this wasn't over. Karen was wounded, embarrassed, and desperate to regain control, and people like that always escalate before they fall. And I was more than ready to let her dig her own hole, one complaint at a time. 2 mornings later, I woke to the sound of a leaf blower, except it wasn't mine. Karen was in her front yard again, blasting away at invisible debris while wearing oversized sunglasses and that same neon visor that made her look like she was directing airport traffic. Her posture screamed defiance. Every pass of that blower pointed directly at my driveway, where she seemed determined to relocate every last leaf on her property. It was less landscaping and more territorial marking. I stepped outside with my coffee and leaned against the porch post. "Morning," I called over the roar. Didn't realize the HOA added noise ordinances for oxygen. She clicked the power off mid-blast. "Some of us maintain our yards properly," she said. "Unlike certain people who think vandalism is landscaping." There it was. She'd finally said it, vandalism. Her voice had that brittle edge, the kind that comes when someone's been stewing over something they can't prove. I sipped my coffee. "If something happened to your yard, Karen, maybe you should take it up with your insurance. Or the gutter company." They seemed very eager to help. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't play innocent with me. I know you did something. The night of the storm, my neighbor across the street saw someone near my property." "That's odd," I said, keeping my tone mild. "Because I was home the whole night." Maybe your neighbor saw the wind. She pointed the blower nozzle like an accusation. You think you're clever, don't you? But the HOA takes these things seriously. Very seriously. I smiled. Then you should report it. I'd love to see how that goes. That line landed exactly how I wanted. She turned away in a huff, firing up the blower again. The leaves shot straight onto my driveway. I didn't bother cleaning them up. The wind took care of them by noon. By the weekend, her paranoia had evolved into surveillance. A small black camera appeared under her mailbox, angled conveniently toward my front yard. The irony was almost artful. The same woman who claimed to care about aesthetics had just installed an eyesore straight out of a spy movie. That's when I decided to get subtle. I didn't retaliate directly, not yet. Instead, I started setting my sprinkler timer for early mornings. The one sprinkler head that arced just high enough to mist across the property line happened to reach her new flower bed. A harmless bit of overspray, technically within code, but enough to leave her porch steps perpetually damp. The following afternoon, she marched over with a printout of the HOA's irrigation guidelines. You're violating runoff policy, she said. Page 3. Water may not extend beyond your property line. I glanced at the paper, then back at her. It's mist, Karen. Atmospheric moisture. Should I file a complaint every time it rains? This isn't funny. You're right, I said. It's hilarious. She stomped away, muttering something about fines and citations. That's when I knew the next chapter of her obsession was about to begin. The very next morning, a letter appeared taped to my door. HOA letterhead, formal language, but something about it felt off. The grammar was too stiff, the formatting wrong, the signature smudged. It accused me of repeated property line violations, and warned that further offenses would result in disciplinary action. I couldn't help but laugh. Karen had gone rogue again. I took a photo, printed 3 copies, and dropped one into the HOA president's mailbox. By evening, I got a call. Hey, said Mark, the actual HOA president, in that exhausted tone of a man who'd seen too many neighborhood feuds. Did Karen give you some kind of letter? She did, I said. Apparently I'm in violation of weather patterns. He sighed. Ignore it. She's not authorized to issue anything. We've told her a dozen times to stop pretending she's still on the board. Maybe you should send her a real letter, I said. Oh, we will. Again. Sure enough, the next day, another note appeared, this time on Karen's door. She stood outside later, fuming, waving it around while ranting to anyone who'd listen. I couldn't hear the words, but the gestures said everything: outrage, denial, martyrdom. That night, around 10 p.m., I caught movement through my side window. Karen again, walking along the fence line, flashlight in hand, pretending to check her garden but obviously scanning my yard. I stayed in the shadows, watching her crouch near my hose reel. My pulse ticked up, but I didn't move. She tugged the hose once, testing something, then walked off. I waited 5 minutes before stepping outside. The end of my hose was unscrewed and left dangling, dripping slightly. Not cut this time, just tampered with. A warning shot. That's when I decided she'd had enough rope to hang herself. The next morning, I set up my own small camera. Nothing fancy, just a motion sensor by the fence facing my driveway. It wasn't about catching her red-handed. It was about establishing a timeline. Then, as if on cue, the weather forecast promised another heavy storm. And this time, I planned to make sure Karen's curiosity met consequences. 2 houses down, my neighbor Dave had a garage full of tools and a mischievous streak to match mine. When I told him what Karen had done to my hose weeks ago, he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his wrench. You want to mess with her plumbing, don't you? Not mess, I said. Just redirect. We spent the afternoon rigging a simple setup. My old hose, an extra connector, and a narrow PVC adapter that could slip under the edge of her garden drain without permanent damage. It would harmlessly send runoff water back into her own yard during the downpour. Gravity and karma would do the rest. We finished before dark, double-checked everything, and walked back laughing like kids who'd just set up the world's slowest booby trap. When the rain came, it didn't hold back. It was one of those long, relentless downpours that made the gutters hum. Around 2 a.m., I checked the footage from my camera. Sure enough, Karen came out in a raincoat, shining her flashlight along my property line again. She crouched, squinting through the sheets of rain, then leaned down toward her drain. A moment later, a gush of muddy water sprayed back at her feet. She screamed, slipped, and fell right into her own flower bed. I nearly choked trying not to laugh. The camera caught everything in grainy clarity, her soaked poncho, the flailing, the pure disbelief on her face. She scrambled up, dripping, and ran back inside. By morning, her yard looked like a miniature rice paddy. The water had backed up enough to flood her walkway and soak the mulch around her porch. I stood at my window with my second cup of coffee, watching her pace back and forth on her porch, shouting into her phone again. An hour later, the HOA president himself pulled up in his SUV. Karen met him at the door, gesturing wildly toward my house. He stood there for 5 full minutes, nodding slowly, before saying something that made her stop mid-rant. Then he walked across the street to me. "Morning," he said. "Karen's convinced you're waging some kind of water war?" I managed a straight face. "That sounds exhausting." "I'm just trying to keep my lawn alive." He chuckled. "That's what I figured. We're filing a cease and desist for her harassment. She's crossed too many lines." "Good luck with that," I said. "Oh, and one more thing," he added, lowering his voice. "You wouldn't happen to have any footage of her, say, tampering with your property?" I smiled slowly. "I might. Send it my way," he said. "It'll make this process a lot smoother." That night, I sent over the clip, Karen creeping along the fence, unscrewing my hose, and the glorious moment she got splashed by her own drain. The HOA board watched it at their next meeting. According to Mark, there was a moment of silence followed by laughter. Karen received an official warning letter that week, citing inappropriate conduct and trespassing. She tried to argue, of course, but the evidence was airtight. For a while, peace returned. She avoided me, avoided eye contact, even started parking on the far end of her driveway like distance could erase embarrassment. But I've learned something about people like Karen: they don't stay quiet for long. Humiliation just ferments into a stronger brew of entitlement. So when I saw her putting up a Neighborhood Watch Captain sign 2 weeks later, I knew Chapter 3 of this saga was about to write itself. I knew something was brewing the morning Karen planted that Neighborhood Watch Captain sign in her front yard. It was bright red, mounted at an angle, and sat next to her mailbox like a flag marking conquered territory. The irony, of course, was that nobody had voted her into that position. The HOA hadn't even mentioned forming a watch group. But to Karen, Neighborhood Watch Captain probably sounded like a promotion from her self-declared position as HOA Enforcer Emeritus. That afternoon, she made her rounds, clipboard in hand, walking from house to house with the energy of a census worker who'd just been told she could hand out tickets. She stopped at every driveway, jotting notes, glancing suspiciously into windows. I watched her from my porch, half amused and half impressed at the sheer commitment to delusion. When she reached my property line, she paused. The smile she forced was so tight it could have cracked porcelain. "Good afternoon," she called, her voice overly sweet. "Just doing some neighborhood safety checks. You wouldn't believe how many people leave hoses lying around or lights uncovered." I leaned on the porch rail. Tragic. Almost like someone's trying to keep their plants alive. She ignored that. "We've had reports of suspicious activity. Late-night noises. People wandering near fences." "Sounds dangerous," I said. "Maybe you should start patrolling in shift. Flashlights, radios, matching jackets." Her smile faltered. "It's not a joke, Daniel." "Oh, I know," I said. "Nothing about you ever is." That earned me a glare sharp enough to peel paint. She scribbled something on her clipboard, then pivoted away dramatically. I didn't need to see the paper to know my address was already circled. 2 nights later, the texts started in the neighborhood group chat. "Anyone know why Karen's shining a flashlight at houses at midnight?" one neighbor asked. Another replied, "She's checking for burglars apparently. Or aliens." Someone else joked, "Pretty sure the only suspicious activity here is her." The thread devolved into memes within minutes. Karen must have seen it, because by the next morning she'd sent out an official-looking Neighborhood Watch bulletin through everyone's mailbox, printed on pale yellow paper, complete with clip art of an eye inside a triangle. It warned residents to remain vigilant for potential trespassers, and, more specifically, be cautious of households exhibiting erratic watering schedules. That line nearly made me spit out my coffee. Erratic watering schedules. The woman was practically naming me without naming me. I wasn't planning to escalate, but Karen's obsession was starting to cost everyone peace of mind. Kids couldn't ride bikes without her demanding they slow down for community safety. Delivery drivers were stopped for identification checks. Even Dave, who lived 2 doors down, said she followed him halfway to his garage one evening asking if he had a permit for his new lawn chairs. So I decided it was time to fight bureaucracy with bureaucracy. The following week, I called the city's non-emergency number and requested an inspection on Karen's house. "Possible improper drainage installation," I said truthfully. The last storm had left her yard soggy enough to breed mosquitoes, and technically, she was in violation of the county's flood mitigation code. 2 days later, a city inspector truck pulled up. I watched from my window as the man in the neon vest took photos, measured slopes, and scribbled notes. Karen rushed out mid-inspection, waving her papers. "I have HOA approval," she shouted. The inspector, a calm middle-aged guy with mud on his boots, said, "Ma'am, this isn't about your HOA. This is city drainage regulation. Looks like your downspouts are redirecting runoff onto public property." "That's impossible," she snapped. "My contractor guaranteed compliance." "Then he'll be the one who gets the notice." I could hear her shrieking from my porch. "Who reported this?" "Anonymous," he said. "We don't release that information." She stood frozen, face twitching between outrage and suspicion, eyes flicking toward my house. That evening, she stormed across the street without knocking. She marched straight to my porch, clipboard under one arm, her voice trembling with fury. "You filed that complaint, didn't you?" I set down my book. "What complaint?" "Don't play dumb. The city was here. Maybe they're finally cracking down on improper drainage," I said, deadpan. Her jaw tightened. "You're harassing me. Karen, you've accused me of vandalism, filmed my house, and walked my property at night. I'd say you're doing a fine job harassing yourself." She pointed at me, shaking. "You think you're clever, but everyone sees what you're doing." "Funny," I said. "From what I hear, everyone's seeing what you're doing with a flashlight." She turned and stomped off, muttering threats about legal action. The next day, a new email from the HOA hit everyone's inbox. Subject line: Clarification, Neighborhood Watch is not an HOA function. It explained, in polite corporate language, that Karen had no authority to conduct inspections or distribute bulletins. They even suggested residents politely decline interaction, if approached. It was beautiful. But Karen wasn't one to surrender quietly. If she couldn't win with fake letters and watch programs, she'd try through pity. She started telling everyone she was being targeted. She claimed someone was vandalizing her garden and flooding her porch intentionally. "They're obsessed with me," she told the Johnsons, loud enough for my open window to catch. "It's psychological warfare." The neighborhood, once politely tolerant, began to turn on her. People stopped waving. A few even avoided her altogether. Dave started referring to her yard as the swamp. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. I came home to find a note taped to my door, not printed, but handwritten. "I know she's been harassing you. I'm sorry. We're trying to handle it. Mark." Attached was a folded letter from the HOA board. They were holding a closed meeting to discuss ongoing member misconduct. The words, potential suspension of privileges, were underlined. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just about a hose or gutters anymore. Karen had waged war on the entire neighborhood, and the neighborhood was quietly preparing to fight back. When the meeting happened, I didn't attend. It was closed to non-board members. But Dave did. He called me afterward. "You won't believe this," he said, laughing. She showed up uninvited, tried to take the chair's seat, and started reading from a binder about citizen oversight. They asked her to leave 3 times before security escorted her out. "Security?" I said, stunned. HOA hired off-duty cops for the meeting. She started screaming about corruption and favoritism. Whole thing's on record. By the weekend, Karen's Neighborhood Watch sign disappeared. Her porch light stayed off for the first time in months. And for a fleeting moment I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. But people like Karen don't retreat, they reload. The first clue came when I noticed the water pressure at my outdoor faucet had dropped. At first, I thought it was a municipal issue, but when I checked the side of the house, the shut-off valve had fresh tool marks. Not enough to turn it off entirely, but enough to choke the flow. Someone had tampered with it. I didn't need to guess who. I set up a second camera, hidden in the corner of the fence, angled toward the side yard. 2 nights later, around midnight, I caught her again, hooded sweatshirt, flashlight glancing over her shoulder. She knelt, fiddled with the valve, and walked off. The next morning, my water line was dripping at the joint. That was it. I sent the footage straight to Mark and attached a short note. Ongoing harassment, property tampering, repeated trespassing. Within 24 hours, he responded, "We're escalating to legal counsel. She's violated HOA bylaws and local trespassing ordinances. The board will coordinate with local authorities." I didn't know whether to feel relief or disbelief. The woman who'd spent months trying to police everyone else was finally being policed herself. The following week, I woke to see a sheriff's cruiser parked in front of her house. Karen stood in the doorway in her bathrobe, arms crossed, face pale. The deputy handed her a paper, spoke for a few minutes, and left. She looked around afterward, scanning the street for someone to blame, but everyone had vanished inside. Curtains drawn, doors shut, collective silence. Later, Dave texted. HOA issued a restraining notice. She's not allowed to approach or contact you. Sheriff just served it. That should have been the end of the story. But when I looked out my window that night, rain clouds gathering again, I couldn't help but notice something poetic. Her new gutters were still connected to the same drainage system she never fixed. The storm rolled in after midnight, hard and heavy. I didn't touch a thing this time. No hoses, no tricks. Nature handled it. I watched from my porch light as water poured straight from her clogged spout onto her front walkway. By dawn, her lawn was once again a muddy mess, her neighborhood watch flyers floating like drowned confetti. I thought about going over, offering help, maybe even an olive branch, but then I remembered the hiss of that first cut hose, the smug look on her face, and the way she said I should thank her. No, I thought, sipping my coffee as the rain eased. Some people only learn when the world teaches them directly. And judging by the way Karen stood in her doorway that morning, staring out at her flooded yard with defeat in her eyes, it looked like the lesson had finally begun. The first thing I noticed after Karen left was the silence. It wasn't just the absence of her leaf blower, her porch lectures, or her clipboard clicks. It was the deeper kind, the kind that makes a neighborhood feel asleep. Even the birds seemed cautious, like they were waiting to see if she'd really gone. I didn't quite believe it myself at first. For a week, I half expected her to appear from behind a bush with a camera or file another complaint from out of jurisdiction. But no, her house sat empty. The blinds drawn, the lawn beginning to yellow, and that "for sale" sign wobbling slightly in the wind. Peace had returned, but it felt strange, hollow. Like the quiet after a long argument when you realize you've forgotten what normal sounds like. By the second week, a realtor's lockbox hung on the front door. Rumor had it, the listing hadn't gotten much interest. The HOA gossip thread said potential buyers were scared off by neighborhood drama. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Karen had turned tranquility into a hazard zone. One morning, I saw the realtor standing on the porch with a young couple. They were polite, smiling, pretending not to notice the uneven patches on the lawn or the faint mildew stains around the gutters. I overheard the agent saying, "The previous owner made a few creative modifications." Creative was one way to put it. The couple didn't buy the house. Neither did the next one. Or the next. By the fourth showing, the "for sale" sign had faded from sun exposure, and a loose screw let it tilt forward, almost like it was bowing in defeat. Then, one night in mid-June, the house lights flicked on again. I noticed them while watering my own plant. It was past 9 p.m., dark enough that the soft amber glow from Karen's windows stood out. I froze mid-hose, staring across the street. Someone was moving inside, shadows shifting behind the curtains. Not movers. Too late for that. The next morning, a truck I didn't recognize sat in her driveway. Mud splattered across the tires, bed piled with paint cans, cleaning supplies, and a power washer. The new owner, maybe. Finally, I thought, someone sane moving in. Around noon, a man stepped out. Mid-40s, broad-shouldered, wearing paint-streaked overalls and a baseball cap. He looked more like a contractor than a homeowner. When he caught me watching, he waved. "Hey there. You must be across the street guy." "That's me," I said, crossing over. "Daniel. You the new owner." He shook my hand. "Call me Rick." "Not yet. Bought the place to flip it." "She left it in a bit of a mess, huh?" I almost laughed. "You could say that. You find any surveillance equipment buried in the drywall yet?" He frowned. "Surveillance? Long story," I said. "Let's just say your seller was enthusiastic about neighborhood monitoring." He grinned. "Ah, one of those. Don't worry, I'm gutting everything. Starting fresh." True to his word, Rick worked fast. Within days, the old fake security sign was gone, the gutters cleaned, the lawn reseeded. For the first time, that house didn't look hostile. But on the fifth morning, while walking to my mailbox, I noticed something odd. A small patch of soil by Karen's old hydrangea bed had been freshly dug and filled back in. Rick caught me looking. "Weird, huh?" he said. "There's this little valve thing buried under there. I thought it was irrigation, but it connects to nothing. Some old plumbing she rigged up." My stomach dropped. "Was it near the downspout?" "Yeah," he said, squinting. "Why?" I hesitated, then laughed it off. Just remembering one of her projects. She was a big fan of improvements. He shook his head. "She must have been nuts. Half the house wiring was wrong. Found a light switch that powered the doorbell." "She had a special talent," I said. Over the next week, I helped Rick occasionally, handing him tools, giving tips about the HOA, telling him which contractors to avoid. It was almost therapeutic, watching someone undo everything Karen had built in her crusade for control. But then came the second storm. It rolled in fast one Friday afternoon. Dark clouds, loud thunder, wind whipping through the street like it had a score to settle. I was inside, fixing dinner, when a crash echoed from outside. I rushed to the porch. Rick was standing in his driveway, staring at his gutters. They were overflowing, water pouring like waterfalls again. "Didn't you just clear those?" I shouted over the wind. "I did," he yelled back. "Something's clogging the line." He climbed a ladder, flashlight in hand, and cursed. "There's something jammed in here. Looks like metal." Lightning cracked, followed by another crash. He climbed down, drenched, holding what looked like a coiled length of brass. My stomach twisted. Even from across the yard, I recognized it. It was a hose fitting. Same size, same design, same faint etching marks where Karen's fingernails had scratched into the metal. "She must have shoved this in here before leaving," Rick said, tossing it into a bucket. "Completely blocked the drain." My first instinct was to tell him everything, that she'd used that same setup to sabotage her own gutters, that she'd obsessed over every inch of this street, that she wasn't just messy, she was vindictive. But something stopped me. Maybe I didn't want to sound like I was still haunted by her. Probably just an accident, I said instead. She was big on DIY. Rick nodded, unconvinced, and went back to work. But that night I couldn't sleep. Rain pounded my roof, and every few minutes, I caught myself glancing toward her dark windows. I couldn't shake the image of Karen standing there again, watching. By morning, the storm had passed. Rick's yard was fine, the gutters intact. Maybe it was over for real this time. Then he showed up at my door. "Hey, he said, scratching his head. "This might sound weird, but you ever hear tapping sounds from her house when it rains?" I frowned. "Tapping? Yeah, like someone knocking inside the walls. Happened last night. Figured maybe it's pipes, but..." He trailed off. I checked. "Pipes are dry." "Probably settling," I said. "Old houses do that." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe." But the next evening, he texted me a video. "Listen." I played it. Rain, faint thunder, and underneath, sharp, rhythmic tapping. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. It wasn't plumbing. It sounded deliberate. "Could be branches," I texted back. "Trees are clear," he replied. "I think something's in the wall." That made my skin crawl. The next day, I helped him pull off a small section of drywall near the laundry room where the sound seemed to come from. Inside, we found insulation, dust, and, wedged behind a stud, a small waterproof bag. Rick blinked. "What the hell?" He pulled it out and unzipped it. Inside were papers. Dozens of them. HOA notices, complaint forms, letters addressed to me, to Mark, to the city inspector, all written in Karen's spiky handwriting. Each one stamped, unsent. Rick whistled. This woman was off the rails. I flipped through them, half disgusted, half fascinated. There were even drafts accusing random neighbors of psychological intimidation. One page was labeled Evidence Log, Daniel, and listed every time I supposedly looked at her mailbox suspiciously. "She never mailed these?" Rick asked. "Guess she was saving them," I said quietly. "Just in case." He tossed the bag into the trash, shaking his head. "You've got a weird little street here, man." "Tell me about it," I muttered. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer, staring at her dark house. It wasn't haunted by ghosts exactly, it was haunted by intent. By the sheer energy of someone who'd built an entire reality around control and couldn't stand losing it. And I realized something I hadn't before. Karen hadn't just been fighting me. She'd been fighting the idea that anyone could live freely next to her. Her rules, her structure, her spotlight, she needed them. Taking those away was like taking away oxygen. But now, all that remained were echoes, literal ones, it seemed. Because around midnight, faintly through the rain, I thought I heard it again. 3 soft knocks, far off in the distance, coming from the house across the street. I told myself it was wind. Houses creak, pipes shift. But the rhythm, the same deliberate pattern, made my pulse quicken. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. I stayed up until dawn, lights on, coffee in hand, waiting for it to stop. When the sun rose, everything was silent again. Rick came out, yawning, waving like nothing had happened. I waved back, pretending everything was fine. But when I looked down at my front walkway, I froze. Lying there, perfectly centered on the concrete, was another small piece of brass. A connector. Identical to the first. And this one had new words scratched into it. Still watching. For a long time, I didn't move. The little brass connector gleamed in the morning light, still damp from the rain. The etching looked fresh, too clean to have been scratched weeks ago. Still watching. 2 words, carved deep enough to catch sunlight, shallow enough to make me question my sanity. I knelt down slowly, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the hedges, but the street was empty. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed, and the world looked perfectly normal. It was almost insulting. I slipped the connector into my pocket and went back inside, locking the door behind me. Rational brain said coincidence. Maybe Rick had found another piece buried in the dirt and thought it was funny to leave as a joke. But the pit in my stomach didn't buy it. Rick wasn't the kind of guy who played psychological games. By noon, I decided to ask him directly. He was outside repainting the front trim, his radio blaring classic rock. I called out, "Hey, Rick, you been digging around again?" He looked down from the ladder. "Not since yesterday." "Why?" "Found another piece of metal on my walkway. Looked like part of your gutter fittings." He frowned. "Nah, I'm done with the gutters. Tossed all the old parts last week." He paused, squinting. "That woman didn't come back, did she?" I forced a laugh. "She's 400 miles away, according to the realtor." "Yeah, well," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, "places remember people like her. House had bad energy when I moved in. Feels lighter now, though." I nodded, pretending to agree, but my pulse was still hammering. When I got back home, I placed the connector on the kitchen counter beside the first one. They were identical except for the scratches. I stared at them too long enough for my imagination to start writing ghost stories. That night, rain threatened again. Wind gusted hard enough to make the porch creak. Around 11, my motion camera pinged. I opened the feed and froze. The frame showed Karen's house. A light had turned on upstairs, then flickered off. The house was supposed to be empty. Rick had told me he'd finished for the day and locked up. I waited 30 seconds, refreshing the feed. The light came back, brighter this time, like someone had walked into the room with a flashlight. Then a shadow moved across the window. My rational mind scrambled for reasons. Maybe Rick forgot something. Maybe the realtor was checking in. But the shape, it didn't move like a person walking. It was slower, more deliberate, like someone pacing in place. I threw on a jacket and stepped outside. The street was silent except for the wind. Rain hadn't started yet, but thunder rumbled far off. Karen's windows glowed faintly, pale gold behind the thin curtains. I crossed halfway to her driveway before I stopped myself. Trespassing, I thought. You're about to do exactly what she used to do. Still, my curiosity wouldn't let go. I called out softly, "Rick? That you?" No answer. Then the light upstairs flicked off. The street fell into darkness. My breath clouded in the cool air. Somewhere behind me, a branch snapped. I turned fast, heart jumping, but it was only the wind tossing a trash bin over. When I looked back at Karen's house, the curtain upstairs had moved. Just a ripple. Like someone watching me. That was enough. I walked back home quickly, shut the door, and double-locked it. I stayed up late scrolling the motion camera footage again and again, but nothing else happened. By 2 a.m., the feed was still. I finally went to bed with the uneasy feeling that something had shifted, that the neighborhood had inhaled again after months of quiet. The next morning, I called Rick. "Hey," I said, "were you in the house last night?" "Around 11. He laughed. "Nope. I was asleep." "Why?" "Thought I saw lights on." He paused. "That's weird. I shut the main breaker when I left." "You sure?" "Positive. No power should be running over there." We hung up, but he called me back 10 minutes later. "You're gonna think I'm crazy," he said, "but the realtor just texted me. The alarm tripped at 11:14 p.m., motion sensor in the upstairs hall. System's battery-powered backup only since I cut the main line. But it only triggers if something moves inside." A chill slid down my spine. "Any sign of a break-in?" "None. Locks are intact. Nothing stolen." "Could be animals," I offered weakly. He didn't sound convinced. "Maybe. But if an animal's big enough to set off a motion alarm, it's big enough to leave tracks. And there's nothing." We both went quiet. By afternoon, he'd changed the locks and boarded the upstairs windows, just in case. I tried to focus on work, but the thought kept gnawing at me. The tapping. The connectors. The light. That night, the storm finally broke. Sheets of rain hammered the pavement, wind howled through the trees, and thunder shook the air. Around midnight, my power flickered. Then my outdoor faucet sputtered and hissed. I froze. That sound, I knew it. I ran to the window. Water was spraying wildly from my hose, which had somehow turned itself on. It whipped like a live wire, drenching my porch. I threw on a raincoat and dashed outside, grabbing the valve to shut it off. The metal was slick, almost greasy. As I turned it, I noticed something taped near the base of the faucet, a small, mud-stained strip of paper sealed under plastic. I peeled it off, heart thudding. 2 words again. Nice aim. For a second, the world tilted. The storm blurred into static around me. I scanned the street. No movement, no lights. Just the flickering glow of Rick's porch lamp through the rain. I banged on his door until he opened, half asleep and confused. What the hell, man? You look like you've seen a ghost. Someone's messing with me, I said, shoving the plastic-wrapped note into his hand. They turned on my hose. He read it, jaw tightening. I'll check the cameras. He pulled me inside. His laptop was already hooked to the house's security feed. We rewound the footage to midnight. Rain blurred most of it, but around 11:58, the motion sensor at the side of my house flickered. A figure moved briefly through the shadows, hooded, small-framed. Could have been anyone. But when the figure turned toward the camera, just for a second, lightning flashed. The face was pale. The expression unmistakable. Karen. I wanted to deny it, but the image burned into my mind. The hood, the sharp chin, that same cold look of self-righteous purpose. Then she was gone, disappearing behind the hedge. Rick stared at me, wide-eyed. That can't be her. She's gone. She was, I said. Until now. We called the police. They searched the area, found nothing. No footprints, no car, no evidence of forced entry. The officer, a young guy with tired eyes, suggested maybe it was an old recording glitch or reflection. Storms can mess with feeds, he said. Especially wireless systems. But the footage wasn't wireless. It was hardwired. For the next few days, neither of us slept well. I left my porch lights on all night. Rick started carrying a flashlight whenever he stepped outside. The whole street felt different, like the air had memory again. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. No strange noises, no motion pings, no note. By the third quiet night, I almost convinced myself it was over. Until Rick called again. Hey, he said, his voice tight. You need to see this. I went over immediately. He led me to the basement of Karen's house, where he'd been cleaning out the old utility room. On the far wall, behind a stack of boxes, was a hatch, a narrow crawlspace cover I hadn't noticed before. He'd pried it open. Inside was a small chamber, maybe 6 feet wide, lined with old insulation and dust. But what caught my eye were the dozens of plastic bags taped along the wall. Each one labeled in Karen's handwriting. Names, date, times, note. Mine appeared more than once. So did other neighbors. She was recording people, Rick said. Writing everything down. Times they came home, what cars they drove, who visited. Look. He held up one labeled, Hose Incident. Inside was a printed photo, me, kneeling next to my cut hose on the night she destroyed it. Taken from across the street. How did she even get this? I whispered. Rick shook his head. Doesn't matter. We're burning it all. We carried every bag outside, piled them in a metal bin, and set them on fire. The rain started again halfway through, hissing against the flames, but the plastic melted anyway, black smoke twisting into the wind. When it was done, Rick turned to me. Whatever's been happening, it ends here. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain, I thought about the 2 connectors still sitting on my counter. I'd meant to throw them away but never did. At 2 a.m., I got up, walked outside barefoot, and carried them to the gutter. I dropped them in, one by one, letting the storm wash them away. The next morning, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The air felt lighter. Rick waved from his porch, smiling. The neighborhood looked new again. Quiet, calm, ordinary. I almost believed the nightmare was over. Until I checked my mailbox. Inside, resting neatly on top of the bills, was a small plastic bag. Inside it, another connector. And scratched across the brass this time were 3 words. Rain's coming back. I stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at the sky. The clouds were gathering again on the horizon, heavy and gray. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled. And I finally understood what peace in this neighborhood really meant: temporary, fragile, and always waiting for the next storm.